Hey guys, Comet here. Welcome back to Oxygen Not Included. In the last episode, I went over my regolith melter, and between episodes, I went ahead and doubled it on both sides. I haven't quite gotten the heat buffer up to temperature yet, still working on that. But in the last episode, I did mention I wanted to swap over all of this equipment up here to thermium. That way I can eliminate the need for this cooling loop that goes through everything. Unfortunately, I don't have very much thermium because I am out of tungsten. I've only got 340 kilograms left. So I could send some rockets out to this glimmering planet, bring back some wolframite and tungsten. But that is a 40 cycle round trip, and it is far enough away to where I can only send one cargo module per trip. And if I've got 4 rockets running constantly, that works out to like 1 cargo bay every 10 cycles, which is pretty low in terms of material throughput. So what I want to do in this episode is melt some Abyssalite into tungsten. Now, in the past, you could just melt insulation directly into tungsten, but now, Abyssalite also makes sour gas in the process. So the best option for tungsten is Abyssalite, and that presents a few problems. Abyssalite has a thermal conductivity of 0, so how do you get something that is completely thermally unreactive to melt? So I was introduced to this concept by Greasy Hammer a while ago, and so I think I'm in a good situation to actually use this idea. The mechanic is usually referred to as flaking, and it's the same bug, a lot of people also call it a bug, that will cause crude oil to boil if it's touching really hot Abyssalite. We can use kind of the reverse process. Instead of the Abyssalite heating up the crude oil and boiling the crude oil, we can use the other medium to cause the Abyssalite to quote-unquote melt. It's not actually melting because no heat is going into the Abyssalite, but pieces of its mass get flaked off. So you will need 2 natural tiles of Abyssalite to make this work. I'm going to put it right in this area. And this build is actually not that complicated, so I'm just going to build it all in survival. I'm not going to bother with a sandbox world. So I'm just going to make some space here. I'm going to save those 2 tiles of Abyssalite. And then while my dupes are doing that, I also want to come over to the printing pod and turn that back on. Now that I've made space for more duplicants, I'd like to start populating these. I'm going to start with the bionic duplicants first, because I don't need to supply them with food. They just need power banks. I want to get a copy of every duplicant I currently have. Now, unfortunately, I can't get a copy of George, because he's not printable. He's discoverable, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get a 3rd duplicant to replace George. Now, I know there is a new duplicant with the DLC, the aquatic DLC, but unfortunately, because this map was made before that, I actually don't have access to that duplicant, even with the mod that lets me customize my duplicate prints. And now that I've got a little bit of room to work with here, I can explain some of the mechanics. We're going to have a window tile right along here, and this is going to act as the heat injector. Then it's very important to make this out of insulite, not just ceramic won't really work here. It will eventually get too hot. The temperatures we're dealing with are kind of insane, so it's important to use space materials for this. But in this little box right here, there's going to be 2 tiles of chlorine that are kept warm by this diamond spike here. And seal up that side as well. Then we'll have like a little holding tank of molten metal right here that is heated from a metal refinery. And then that heat will go into the Abyssalite. Well, the heat goes into the chlorine, not into the Abyssalite. And then to replenish the Abyssalite, so the tile doesn't just completely disappear, I'm going to use a dispenser. Then right underneath the dispenser, this could be a normal tile. I'm just going to use insulated ceramic there. Then I'm just going to make a little box out of ceramic. This doesn't need to be super heavy-duty material. But then here, I'm going to switch back to insulate. This is what's going to contain all the really hot metal. Then I can go back to ceramic right here. So I'm going to use a metal refinery to supply all of the heat. And then right underneath the refinery in the center, I'm going to make that particular tile out of insulate so that the coolant has nothing to interact with. Then also out of insulate, some piping right there, and a vent to drop out the hot metal. To pick up and recirculate the metal, I'm going to use the same trick I did with the metal volcanoes here. And this only works with molten metals, it doesn't work with magma or any other liquids. You can use an auto sweeper to pick up from a pitcher pump and place directly into a bottle drainer, which is an easy way of getting this hot molten metal into a pipe. And I'm going to have 2 right there, with a pitcher pump right here. Now, there's a couple of options when it comes to the coolant. The first one that comes to mind is molten steel. This is pretty easy to work with because it has such a wide range on its boiling and freezing points. The problem is that its boiling point is just a tad bit too low. So the maximum temperature on the coolant is 3827 before it turns into steel gas and breaks everything. The problem is that in order to actually get the flaking to occur on the Abyssalite, the coolant needs to be above 3400. So there's only about 500, 600 degrees of temperature margins there before the system completely breaks. So I think the next best thing might be niobium. It won't boil until 4700 degrees. Then I think the last thing might also be iridium. This one boils at 4100. It has a specific capacity of 0.13. That's pretty low. Let's check niobium. This is higher. So I could store more heat per degree Celsius, which means the temperature would fluctuate less drastically. It would be easier to control niobium than it would be iridium. And then I guess if you're really baller, you could just use molten tungsten. That wouldn't boil until about 6000 degrees. And obviously it has to stay hotter than the freezing point of tungsten because we're melting Abyssalite. So theoretically, molten tungsten is the best option. Unfortunately, getting molten tungsten is not the easiest thing in the world. There's a couple ways of making molten metals. You can use a kiln in a vacuum, but it's actually faster to do the same thing with an aqua tuner, and you actually get more mass out of it too, because this is 1200 kilos, and a kiln is only 200 kilos. So I'm going to make some aqua tuners out of niobium here, on top of some niobium mesh tiles. Aqua tuner has to be built on top of something. Then I'm going to vacuum all of this out. So let's get in a liquid lock here, and then one right here. The return piping can just look like that. I'm gonna need some shipping to reach in and grab that tile there. Then I'll want a loader. And then this is one of the few scenarios where I actually need a conveyor meter. That's going to be really helpful. On some temporary power here, just to power those gas pumps. Oh, it's been a long time since I've heard that noise. Alright, let's pick another duplicate here. Oh, well, that's ironic. Of course it wants to give me tungsten. So let's take another bionic duplicate. I'll edit you slightly. Give you the suit training booster. Urbanite, -3 cuisine, -3 agriculture. Yeah, it's fine. We'll go ahead and print another ulti. Change your name so I can keep track of them. Ulti 2. Then we'll put you in here. Assign you a bed. And then disable permissions on the other housing units. Don't want you intermingling. And then to prevent your ears from breaking, we'll get improved hardware. So I'm gonna need a niobium aqua tuner. I'll use ceramic here is probably fine. Output, input. Then you could just cool off this area. Something temporary right here is fine. Then I'm gonna make this power wire out of niobium, just in case it melts. But in this area here, I could use copper. I don't want any extra molten metals in here. If anything's gonna melt, I want it to be the material that's gonna be in the pool eventually anyway. I'm gonna have to melt a few aqua tuners. But because an aqua tuner can produce so much heat so quickly, it's... right, look at this. 585 kilodtus. Versus a kiln, which only makes 20. So, if you feel like waiting forever, you can use a kiln. I don't feel like waiting forever, so I'm going to use an aqua tuner. You know, I have the insulate to spare, just to be safe. I'm going to make this piping right next to the aqua tuner out of insulate. Ceramic has a melting point of only 1800 degrees. I'm also going to need to cool off this equipment in here, because it's going to be in a vacuum. So let's do conduction panel, conduction panel, conduction panel, and then the conduction panel up there on that sweeper. Then out of just ceramic is fine. I can link all of these together. Something like that is fine. Then I'll just use the atmosphere as the coolant. So it'll take a quick detour outside of the build, and then pop back in to cool everything. Now, the transfer medium inside of this chamber here is not too relevant to the functionality of the build, but it is very important to the efficiency of the build. You want this to get really, really hot, but you don't necessarily need it to have high conductivity into the Abyssalite. Right, all that matters is the temperature of whatever the Abyssalite is touching, not the temperature of the Abyssalite. Right, we're utilizing the flaking mechanic, not necessarily heat transfer. So there's a couple of gases that work for that. Hydrogen is probably one of the worst ones to use, It has a thermal conductivity of 0.168. Carbon dioxide is a pretty good runner-up at 0.015, but the best gas for this is actually chlorine. It has an incredibly low thermal conductivity, 0.008. So the gas can very easily heat up from the diamond, but the heat won't be forced into the abyssalite. Because any heat that goes into the abyssalite is just wasted, right? We want the heat to cause flaking, not to go into the abyssalite. So the fewer batches of refined metal you can run means the whole thing is just more efficient. So I think I have some bleach stone laying around somewhere. I'll just get in a storage bin there, have some bleach stone dropped off. Another duplicate. So I do want a bionic duplicate, but I don't need a third ulti. Let's take maybe a chip. And dissociative is fine. We'll print you. Let's see what do you have for me this time. A Stela? You could take a Stela. Welcome to the base. I think I'm safe to start getting super coolant into here. Seal that back up now that this is exclusively chlorine. I want to run this aqua tuner till it melts. And it will take overheat damage before it melts, so just make sure to disable auto repair. It has so much health, though, it will melt before it breaks. Just needs to get up to 2476. And there it goes. So, I'll get another one down, and melt it again. I don't know where the niobium ended up. That's a little strange. Ah, this mesh tile has a vacuum under it. This mesh tile also has a vacuum, but if I highlight that one, the vacuum goes away. Interesting. I think that might be a solid tile right there. Yeah, so the problem is that this only gets up to 2476 and then instantly melts. So the hottest I could ever make this is just at the threshold for where niobium refreezes. Oh dear. Well, that's not exactly what I wanted. Let's try that again. This is just burning through my niobium. Every time it makes a solid tile like that, I lose half the mass. I don't like that. I think what I'm gonna do... I could get a little bit of steel going. Oh, that's odd. It says there's niobium there, but I can't dig it up. I'm gonna try a quick reload. That doesn't seem to have helped. It still thinks there's a niobium tile there. Oh well, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna use steel as like an intermediary to heat up the niobium, because steel is just easier to work with. Because once I get something into this refinery, it's going to be super easy to add heat to the system. I just need something to work. Almost there. Beautiful. Oh, now the steel is stuck here. What? That's okay. I can work with that. I'll just get the dupes to mop this up and put it into these drainers. Too much liquid. Son of a bitch. Alright, I gotta figure out how to deal with that. So I can build over the top of it. Okay, there we go. Ah, it's so bizarre. Set these to molten steel. Enable auto bottle. Run a few batches of steel in here. And then try and melt all this niobium. And then I gotta get all the steel out of here so that it's exclusively niobium. This niobium is so close to melting. I believe. There it goes. Beautiful. Not beautiful. Oh god. No, we're okay. This is all made out of insulite. So I'll get this loop cleaned up. I need to get the steel out of here now that I've got molten niobium. I may want to add more niobium to this, though, so... let's just use some mesh tiles. Those will melt. Might be dangerous to deliver 800 kilos at a time, but I think temperature is high enough. I just want to quickly increase my molten niobium. And that's what I was afraid of. It's a good thing we still have the steel in place. This will all remelt. Alright, here's the plan for getting the steel out of here without breaking the niobium or letting the niobium solidify. I'm gonna get a reservoir right here on some insulite tiling temporarily. This pipe is gonna go up, branch to here, and then come down to here. I'm gonna buffer up some warm niobium. I'm going to drop in some more niobium that's cooler that I want to melt. That will solidify the niobium that's here. And then I can come over the top and mop up any steel that this pitcher pump can't grab. Then I'll use the buffered niobium to remelt the solidified niobium. So I'll set that one to molten niobium. I will snip its exit. I'm gonna run the remainder of the steel through, just to clear out the internal buffer here of molten steel. And I can see that doing the steel recipe will raise the temperature of molten niobium by 882 degrees. Which should be nicely in range of all the temperatures I need. Yeah, so I could get the niobium up to like 3,900 degrees before sending it back through the refinery. Which is well above the point I need it to be to flake the abyssalite. Okay, so there's no molten steel left in here. I have a buffer of niobium here. I need to get this to freeze. Add in some shift plates to cause that. Then I can mop up the steel and get it out, and then use this to remelt that existing niobium. Alright. Quickly now, dupes. Too much liquid. God damn it. Okay, turn you off of niobium, turn you on to steel, redirect that, then I can empty this. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, I need to let that niobium go through. So that is a steel bubble. I need to go over here instead. Okay. So the pitcher pump will remove the steel to the point where I can mop it up. Get some dupes in there, please. Okay, all of the steel is gone. I can do that. Snip that. Technically, I shouldn't need any of this anymore. I will connect the niobium buffer back up. That can drop off. Okay. Hopefully, there is enough heat stuck in this buffer that I can use to remelt this. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to put steel back in. Well, that was a journey, but I've got molten niobium now as a coolant. This will let me go all the way up to 4,700 degrees. But I think I'm okay to seal this up now. Dupes shouldn't need to get back into there. I'll go over what materials I used where, so you can see exactly where I used Abyssalite versus ceramic. So anything that's touching the molten niobium, or anything really, really hot, should be Abyssalite. Otherwise, ceramic is fine. While I was dealing with that mess, a lot of stuff happened here, so I got a new printable. Let's take on another bionic duplicant. I don't have another Eduardo. Some rockets have returned. We'll clear this out and send them out again. Oh, all of them have returned. So, my researching rocket. You have discovered isosap here on this volcanic planet. Everything in this ring has been researched, so we're going to go to the oxidized asteroid now instead. This one does not have enough resources available. Let's check here. Yep, that has enough. We'll launch you. So you can be launched as well. How about you? Yeah, you're good. Okay. Distractions out of the way. This has gone up to 3,000 degrees. I think it's almost time to turn that into diamond tiling. Now I can go over the point of this conveyor meter here. It's going to reset itself and also send a pulse to the dispenser. Every 100 units, then this needs to trigger 100 units at the same time the meter does. Because mass will flake off of this bottom tile here, and it needs to be added back in the exact proportion as what is leaving. So that's an easy way of automating that whole process. You don't need to monitor the mass in there. At this point, it's just a waiting game. Once this gets up to 3,400 degrees, we should start to see some flaking and some solid tungsten debris down here. Then to make sure this dispenser stays topped up, I'm going to put in a storage bin here. Set this to Abyssalite. And I shouldn't have to think about that anymore. I should just be getting free tungsten from Abyssalite. Then I want that to immediately get converted to thermium over here. Because it's going to come out very, very hot. So I could run it through a steam turbine, collect some extra power, but I solved power a long time ago. I don't need the power. I'm just going to take that really hot tungsten, throw it straight into thermium. I shouldn't need to send any dupes back in there. I'm going to seal that up. Get rid of this liquid lock. Get all this out of the way. Return things to normal. Should be just about there. We're at 3,400 degrees here. Just chlorine does not want to heat up enough. There we go. That was our first piece. Right, so this loses 5 kilos every time it flakes. And then once it's lost 100 kilos, it will trigger this conveyor meter, and this dispenser will drop off 100 kilos back into that tile. Should see that trigger here in a second. There it goes. And we've increased the mass again. Beautiful. Now, I need a way to control this refinery without knowing the temperature of this liquid. Because if I put something in here to detect the temperature, it's just going to melt. And I could indirectly know that this is too cold if I haven't gotten a piece of tungsten in a while. So I could use a memory toggle. Let me try and think about this. So we have the reset, the set, and then I could have like a timer sensor. So let's say coming from the conveyor meter, every time it gets to 100, it's going to set the memory toggle and turn off the metal refinery. So we're going to take an inverted output from the memory toggle. Then the timer sensor will periodically reset the memory toggle, turning the metal refinery back on. And if we're not getting any tungsten, then the memory toggle will not be set, meaning it's stuck in the reset position because we're out of tungsten. Yeah, I think the logic checks out there. Memory toggle can fit right there. The set function, that'll just go around. So that can go there to a timer sensor and tell it to periodically check if it's had any tungsten in a while. Okay, let's see if this works. So right now, it is off. Once we get to 100 kilos of tungsten, it should trigger the memory toggle. But it was instantly reset by the timer. So the green duration, let's say a full cycle is 600. Red duration, let's say like a 1/10 of the cycle. So I've got to do, what, 540 there for the total of 60. So it's in the green duration, it's being reset, so now if tungsten gets triggered... Tungsten is not triggering. Tungsten can never trigger. This is too cold. I think I have that backwards. Oh, right. I don't have the NOT gate. There we go. Enabled by automation grid, because it's too cold. And the timer sensor makes a full cycle and clocks the memory toggle. It will be saving the offness of this, allowing the refinery to stay on. Then once some tungsten passes through, the state of the memory toggle will flip, which turns off the refinery. Then the timer sensor will issue another check, and if there's no tungsten again, then it'll turn the refinery back on. Okay, yeah, that'll work. So that'll keep the coolant from boiling. There might be a couple of occasions where it's just not running because the sensor hasn't tripped yet. I suppose I could increase the sampling frequency. Let's do like 54 and 6. I think this needs to swap. 6 and 54. Based on the description of the memory toggle, sending a green signal to the reset port will reset the memory back to red. And since I'm sending that through a NOT gate, sending a green signal turns the refinery on. So we want to be sending a red signal the majority of the time. Because what trips it is the detection of tungsten. This is just working great. All of this so that I don't have to go out to the glimmering planet. That's funny. I mean, it's working. I've got how much Abyssalite to spend? 57,000 tons. Oh, that is so much tungsten. Well, now that I'm converting it all over to thermium, I think I can start swapping some of this stuff over. Let's start with the miners. That'll actually return a lot of steel back to me, too. Alright, I can get the rest of the stuff converted over between episodes. There's one last duplicate I want to print here. I need my second gizmo. Alright, Gizmo 2. Welcome to the base. Now that I have doubled my bionic duplicate count, I should probably double that. Process twice as much gunk. I'll go over the overlays here one last time. So really simple plumbing, cooling loop. Got an input and an output to the metal refinery. Here is the power. Then the automation, I think, is the most complicated part. But I'll explain it one more time. This conveyor meter resets itself and sends a quick green pulse like that every time it processes 100 kilos of tungsten. That lets this dispenser know when to refill the tile. Then that signal is also passed to the memory toggle, turning on the output, which then gets inverted to the refinery. So if it's detecting tungsten, the refinery is off. If it's not detecting tungsten, then this timer sensor here will periodically reset the memory toggle. And if it is in an off state, not being triggered by tungsten, then the refinery can work, and this pool will heat back up. and melt some more tungsten, because it's impossible to directly measure the temperature of this pool. Then, as far as materials are concerned, I'm using Abyssalite in all of the areas that come in contact with really hot material. So these tiles here, touching the molten niobium and the diamond. Then all encompassing this chlorine in here. And we're using chlorine again just to prevent any heat transfer into the Abyssalite. We're not trying to heat up the Abyssalite, we're trying to heat up the chlorine. Because the hot chlorine causes the flaking, not the hot Abyssalite. Then whatever you set this conveyor meter to, just set that exact same amount in the loader here, or the dispenser. As far as coolants are concerned, I would go with niobium. I think that's probably the best. You could get away with steel. Might be a little tricky to keep it at the right temperature. But molten iridium would also work. So that is how I would go about building an Abyssalite melter to get lots and lots of tungsten. Again, this was inspired by Greasy Hammer, so I'll leave a link to that original video that I watched. So let's take stock of everything that's happened in this episode. Other than the Abyssalite melter, I got 6 new duplicates, 3 for this housing unit, and 3 for this housing unit. Just the bionics for now. In the next few episodes, I'll be taking on just the basic duplicates to fully populate these two. I need to get this cleared out. This is slowly warming up still. I'm sure I'll get that up to temperature between episodes and then get the second regolith melter online. I really need to get in the hatch ranches. I think, yeah, probably in this area, to process all of this igneous rock once the regolith melters start up again. So I will need some kind of secondary cooling for these to get it down to the comfort range for the hatches. I'm thinking just some steam turbines up in this area here. Then I'll double that on both sides, so I'll have some hatch ranches over here, some hatch ranches over here, secondary cooler here, secondary cooler here. And then I think I might actually move the Dreco Ranch to be next to the hatches. If I'm going to be doubling my duplicate count, I'm also going to need to double my Frostburger production. So I'll duplicate that over on this side. And then looking even further into the future, I want to do something with all of this magma down here. I need to remove it, cool it off, and then I want to use this as like a water tank. Kind of like how I have a giant oil tank down here and a giant natural gas tank down here. I want to do the same thing, but for water, to make managing all of the different pipes easier. Because I have so many different sources and so many different requesters that it's hard to balance everything. So I want to just consolidate everything into one giant water tank down at the bottom of the map to make pumping easier. But in order to do that, I gotta get the magma out first. But I just gotta take things one step at a time. So hatch ranches first, then we'll deal with the magma maybe in a future episode. But that's gonna be it for this one. I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.